Hey everyone, welcome back to another Excel Better video. And in this tutorial, I want to talk very directly with you guys about indirect formulas. I want to cover what an indirect formula does and offer a couple practical applications of how you can go about using them. But if you get creative, you can find a lot of different ways that you can apply these to your spreadsheets. So the two ways that I'm going to be covering, I'm going to show you how you can use an indirect formula to get information from new tabs that are inserted into your workbook. And then I'm also going to be able to show you how you can use this to get grab different columns using like a drop down type of functionality on another tab. So I'm going to walk through those two scenarios with you guys. And of course, if you have any questions along the way, feel free to drop a comment and I'd love to go into more detail, or if there's another topic or anything else you'd like me to cover, be happy to do that. Let me know. Okay, let's get into it. So first of all, let's just start typing in an indirect. So we're going to say equals indirect. I'm going to go ahead and hit tab. Well, like before we do that, let's read this. It says indirect returns the reference specified by a text string, which I'm not sure if this is the same for you guys, but I read that and it's not immediately obvious what that actually means, which of course is the point of this video. But really at the heart of it, what an indirect formula is going to do is it's going to say what are the contents of a cell, or what are the contents of this, and it's going to return that kind of red as if it were the formula string. And even that might not sound that intuitive, but let's kind of show an example here. So if I wanted to say indirect just A1 right off the bat, this isn't going to do anything for us. So if I close this, it's going to give me a reference error, which it does. So if I said indirect A1, but if I said indirect, let's say in quotes A1, now what this is going to do is it's going to actually interpret indirect A1. So this is actually going to give me the results of the cell A1. Now this in and of itself isn't that useful to us because we could have just literally said equals A1. But we are going to see that there are going to be times that that's going to be useful to be able to have the functionality. So let's go ahead and get into what that would look like. So if we imagine we have, different tabs of information here. So we've got a tab here for Paul, Gary, Steve, and Tom. We have these tabs, and on each tab we got just a simplified, very simple idea. Each of these in cell A1 has a different number, right? And we want a formula over here that's actually going to be able to pull those numbers for these tabs, and in such a way where if we insert a new tab, it can automatically drag down this formula and capture it based on the new name. So the way that this is set up right now, if there's a tab that I want to insert for Sarah, it's going to say, hey, it doesn't exist. Okay. But if I come over here and if I actually create a tab for Sarah and come back over here, it's actually going to update for us automatically. And we can prove that it's connected to that tab because if we really had this say 111 and we come back over here, we see that it's actually picking up that 111. So that can be rather useful to have because now, again, if you're inserting new tabs and you're actually putting that tab name over here, you can automatically be connecting to that. But how does that work? So that works in, for me over here, if we're going to actually look at what each formula is would look like if we're just going to reference A1, it's going to look like this. It's going to say equals Paul, exclamation mark, and then A1, right? So like literally meaning if I was going to say equals, come over to this Paul tab, click into A1, that's the structure that it looks like. Paul, exclamation mark, A1, okay? Now, if I actually just let that calculate, it does this. If we throw an apostrophe in front of that, like so, single apostrophe or single quote, if we do that and then we hit enter, it's actually going to keep that as like a text string so we can actually look at it. So if we want to be able to reference this while we're actually writing our indirect, that can be useful to do. It's kind of just a nice thing to have, not something that's absolutely necessary, but again, it can help. and it helped me, so I wanted to kind of pass that along with you guys. Okay, so the way this formula is currently set up, this is saying indirect A2, so it's saying take indirect the contents of this cell, and then it uses the and sign, or the ampersand. It's taking that sign, which is really just like a shorter way to say concatenate. So it's saying take this and combine it with, in quotes, an exclamation mark and A1. And when you're putting things in double quotes like this, it's saying that it's only combining it with this, but by putting it in double quotes, it's letting Excel know that you mean this to be a text string. So when we actually get done with this, what we're going to do is this formula is going to read, it's going to say equals A2, and actually let's just maybe get rid of the indirect on this for a second. So without the indirect, it's going to say Paul exclamation mark A1, right? And we know that if we just were going to say, point that over to the cell that we wanted, this is the structure that it would look at. It's going to say Paul exclamation mark A1. So what the indirect is doing is it's going to say, an indirect would actually say, hey, just execute this as if it were, as if it were just a normal formula, or just like a normal, string that it was doing. So it's going to execute it as if it's like this, but now because we're interpreting it with this way, and we're adding a variable based on a cell over here, based on our tab, it's actually going to allow us to dynamically find that. So I'm going to go ahead and hit undo and bring back our indirect. So that's how, when we go down to this next row here, because now we're looking at indirect A3, so we're saying take Gary, combine it with the exclamation mark and the A1, and we're doing that because if we were going to, again, say equals, go to the Gary tab, click into A1, and we come back, we can see that that's exactly what we have. We want it to say Gary, which we got here, and we want it to have an exclamation mark with A1. Well, our exclamation mark and A1 is the text string that we're using within our double quotes. So there we have it. Now, you might be wondering, some different ways to modify this, because, you might not necessarily want this to be in cell A1. Maybe all of these, tabs have something in A2. So let's just go ahead and update that. I'm putting a different number in each of these. Okay. So now if we come back over here, now if we decided that we just really wanted this to be A2, I would be able to only change that, that to A2, hit enter. And now if I copy that down, it's now going to be referencing A2 for all of these. So, and that's another thing to keep in mind, that, using the indirect tab for inserting in new tabs like this, you want your new tabs to really be formatted in the same way. And I know sometimes that's going to be true and sometimes it's not. So this could be, practical application could be if you're inserting new tabs for a timesheet that's filled out. You could capture the information in this way based on naming the tab the same as what you have in a particular column. You could do this for like a sales sheet if they're formatted in the same way and your sales totals are summed up in the same cell, for example. So there are uses where that's going to work and cases where it's not going to work, but that's how we can use the indirect to be able to actually pull in dynamically new tabs. Okay. Now, another use that I mentioned is that we can actually use the indirect to be able to sort of dynamically sum based on, a certain column that we want to pull from. So if we had over here, let's just say we have, multiple weeks of data, and over here, we have something that we want summed up. So let's say we want all the sales for week 1 summed up for Washington, Michigan, and Illinois, which we can do from over here, because we have, for week 1, here's all of our Washington sales, Michigan sales, and the Illinois sales. Which, by the way, if we actually just, if I hold select and then press the down arrow key here, it's actually going to allow me to just select the or the range that I want to select, and I can look in the lower right hand corner and it'll give me some quick statistics. It'll show me the average, the count, and the sum. So I can tell just by looking at this that whatever formula I write here, I want that to be equal to 5134. And if I click here, hold shift and down arrow, I can see that for Michigan week 1, I want it to be 7739. So keep that in mind, that, and I'll try to remind you when I go through and check this as I go through this, that's kind of what I'm using to check. If I highlight a certain range, I can come down here and see that sum, and that will let me quickly test if my formula is working for future weeks. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to write this with a sumif, and I'm going to do it without an indirect first. So if I just wanted to do a sumif to be able to get the answer for this, it's going to ask me my range. And the range at first is saying, you know, what criteria do I want to narrow this down based on? And I want to narrow it down based on state. So that's my range, the first piece of this. And the criteria is going to be Washington, or WA for the first one. Now I could type in WA as a text string by putting it in double quotes. So I could be doing that. But then if I copy it down, it's not going to grab Michigan and not going to grab Illinois. So I'm going to just use I2. And then it's going to ask, what's my sum range? Well, because right now I'm using for week 1, I'm going to just click into week 1, and I get 5134. If I copy that down, then again, this is where I can actually quickly check, as I was describing, by saying, okay, 5134 matches the actual sum here. This answer is correct. Michigan should be 7739. If I click at the top here, highlight that range, 7739, which would mean that Illinois should be 8737, and it is. So right off the bat, I can tell that this is working. But if I just leave this the way it is and I change this to week 2, nothing's changing. I'm still getting the same answers, right? Change it to week 3, same answers. Now, if I wanted this to update dynamically based on my week selection, I can do that, but I would have to be using the indirect. Or at least that's one way you could go about doing it. I'm always kind of careful to say you have to be doing this in Excel, because I know there are a lot of different ways to go about doing things, a lot of different ways of going about finding the answer. So one of the ways I will show you in this case is how you can use an indirect to dynamically do this. So the way I do this is I will actually name each of these columns, and I will do that with an underscore. So I'm going to name it as week underscore 1, which I already did in this case. And I'm going to name this week underscore 2. And I'm doing this because I can't have an indirects. You can't have a space. So it's just easier to be able to work with an underscore if that's something that you can do. So week 3, I haven't actually named this one yet. So I'm going to call this week underscore 3. And I'm going to call this week underscore 4. And, you know, actually, let me hit undo on that. Like, let's say I actually wanted to call this week 4, but I actually accidentally called it week 44. If you realize that you made a mistake with this, whenever you're naming cells or ranges, you can always go to your formula bar and to your name manager, and it's going to show you everything that you've named so far, and it's going to show you what that actually entails. So in our case, I could go down to week 44, say I want to edit it, and the name is currently week 44. I'm like, you know what? I really wanted that to be week 4. I'm going to change that. I'm going to hit OK. I'm going to hit close, and now we have that correct. So I just want to be able to kind of show you how you could go about changing these or correcting these if you need to do that. So now each of these are named. Now, you don't need to be doing this either, but I like to, in this case, be able to actually put a little drop-down box so I can select my weeks over here. So I'm going to go to Data, and then over here under the Data tab, there's this section called Data Validation. I'm going to left-click into this, and it's going to ask me what I want to allow, and I'm going to use a list in this case, which basically whenever I'm using data validation up to this point, I've always been using a list. So I mean, I'm sure that we can talk about other uses for this, but I think that's going to get you through a lot of what you need in these types of situations. So I'm going to hit list, and then the other important piece of this is to actually select my source. So I'm going to go ahead and click this button here, and I'm going to just drag this across the top. And by doing this, this is going to be saying that in my dropdown, it's only going to be allowing me to make selections that are in this range. And I'm going to hit OK. And now by doing that, now I have a little drop-down box, and it gives me all of my selections for the weeks that I would want. So I could click week 1, or 4 or 5, whatever I'd like to do. But again, even now, it's not dynamically selecting the way we would like it to be working. So the final piece of the puzzle is going to be adding an indirect formula to this. And right off the bat, I can tell you that your actual range for where the states are in this example is not going to change. So even though our weeks are going to be dynamic, our criteria is always going to be here, or that criteria range is always going to be in column A. So we don't need to play around with this. We know that as we're dragging this down, that it's going to be looking at the individual state criteria that we've selected here. So we're good there. But the last piece is we want to figure out how we can actually get this week 1 to be updated based on what's up here, right? And we can't simply, by the way, like if I just wanted to say that, it's not going to work. But if I wanted to say indirect J1, it is going to work. And then I'm also going to hit F4. So if you're clicked into any cell within a formula bar here and you hit F4, it's going to make it an absolute reference, which means that it's going to put the $sign in front of the column, a $sign in front of the number. And by doing that, as I drag it down, it's going to actually still be looking at J1, and it's not going to move with as I'm dragging it down, which is exactly what we want because we want it to continue to look at the week up here. So now this is set up where if I choose week 1, it's going to give me the results from this column. And it's doing that because it's saying indirectly look at week _1. Okay, so if we do this and we select a different week here, we can see that it's actually now going to be moving. And we can do that same check for each of these just to get a feel for it. So for Washington, week 2 should be 53.66. If we jump to week 4, we could say Washington should be 42.33, and that's exactly what's being given here. So we can see that this is going to work for us. It's going to dynamically allow us to use the sumif, and it's going to jump around from the different weeks based on our indirect feature. Okay, so these were 2 practical applications that I've been able to use the indirect function for. Some of this just kind of takes playing around with it, getting used to it, but I do believe that as you get more comfortable using the indirect formula, that you can find some other creative uses for it in the future. So hopefully this video was useful for you guys. If it was, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment. Go ahead and hit subscribe. I'm going to be sending out more videos like this in the future, so would love to connect and help you guys out. So thanks a lot.